Today's stories get pretty explicit. Proceed at your own risk. Let's get into it. The Lunchbox. I was out of a job and had already spent all my savings. I was desperate for money and willing to do whatever it took to make some cash. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a junkie or a gambler. The thing is, I made some bad investments following a friend's lead that was supposedly 100% secure, but all my money went down the drain. I had been living off loans for 6 months already, waiting for my money to come back. I hadn't seen one penny and was not only flat out broke, but also owed many people money. I'm telling you this because if I had a bank account with money, I wouldn't have done what that man asked me to do. It was either that or beg for food. But back to the story. I was walking by a set of rundown houses in the neighborhood next to the one I lived in with my parents. I was 24 at the time, and with a clean shave looked something like 16. As soon as I walked by a torn-down house with chipping paint on the outside and broken windows, I heard someone calling me. I turned around and there he was, a man with a white beard, a grin, and scarce hair. He said, "Hey kiddo, do you want to make some easy cash?" He said the magic word. Yes. I was willing to do anything for some dollars in my hands. I said yes and walked closer to the house's fence. It was old and rusty, and it looked like a tornado had hit it the week before. "What do you want me to do, man?" I asked in a casual tone, pretending to be older and more secure than I was. He asked me right away how old I was. When I answered I was 24, he oddly replied, "Nothing over 20 is good for me." I wasn't going to let that money go easily, so I replied, "What do I have to do for that cash, man?" He looked at me again and stayed silent for what seemed an eternity, but it was probably only a minute. "I think you could still be of some use," he replied, and moved away from the door, showing me the way in. In any other moment of my life, I would have been hesitant, or even afraid. But that moment, I was neither of those. I was needy. If I knew what I was going to find in there, though, I wouldn't have done it for $1 million. We walked inside, and as soon as we entered, I was freaked out. The living room looked like a kid's playground full of colorful toys, a popcorn machine, and a huge clown face on the wall. I froze and stood at the door, stiff and scared. Yet my need for dough was greater than my self-preservation instincts, so I went in. He gave me a couple of yellow rubber gloves, a bucket of water, and some chemicals. He then instructed me to clean up all the red stains I saw on the carpet or the walls. "Red stains?" I asked, baffled. "Do you mean red like in blood?" He looked at me and replied, "Hey, kiddo, do you want the money or not? Now get to work, will you?" I replied, "Yes, sir," got on my knees to scrub the rug and take the spots off from the wall the best I could. He would go to the basement and back as if he was in a hurry. I could hear the sound of a chainsaw and thought he was just making lumber for the heater. I couldn't be any further from the truth. What was happening down there was far more macabre. The last time he made it up, he asked me a round of uncomfortable questions. "Did you go to primary school?" he asked first. I replied that I had, of course. He replied, "What kind of uniform did you wear?" Before I could answer, he added with a piercing look, "Can I see pictures of you wearing that uniform? I'll pay you for them. Do you still have it? Do you think you can sell it to me?" As I said, I was desperate for cash, so after he paid me for the cleanup, I went home and I searched all over the place for the uniform and the pictures and made it back to the place. The sun had fallen and it was getting cold, besides being dark. He opened the front door and let me in, looking all over suspiciously. Everything was in boxes as if he was leaving the property. The clown face was gone and the main room looked more normal, colorless, and somehow sadder, but way less frightening. He looked worried, but his face changed completely when he saw the uniform and paid me right away. He gave me twice the money he promised to pay. He then said, "Will you do one more thing for me? I'll pay you really well if you say yes." I didn't think it over because, in my mind, this old dude was just a perv and, I needed cash. He took me down to the basement. It was dimly lit. and it smells like bleach and cleaning chemicals. All I could see were 3 large black bags in the center of the room. He said, "Pick those up. Let's get moving." So I did. They were very, very heavy and kind of saggy. We made it out of the house and got in his car. We drove to the outskirts of the city. We stopped by the river, and he instructed me to dispose of the bags one at a time in different sections where the current was the strongest. The plastic of one of them unwrapped, and I could see a human hand. It looked like the hand of a little kid. Then, the full arm emerged and floated into the water before sinking forever. I couldn't believe my eyes, but he wasn't looking when that happened. I was very scared to go inside the car with him again, but figured that, if I could keep it to myself, then I would be safe because he didn't know that I knew. He paid me $5,000 in cash for the whole thing as soon as we made it back. I asked if he was leaving the house, and he said, "Yes, this house is dirty. I have to move." As I turned around to leave, I stumbled on a kid's lunchbox. It was half buried in his front yard. He looked at me and said, "People leave trash anywhere these days, huh?" My running sneakers. There had been some abductions in the little town I lived in, and it had made it to national news. Suddenly, my 10,000-habitant town was being visited by journalists, detectives, and curious people from all around the country. All the people reported missing were women in their late 20s. The police had been receiving anonymous letters from the killer, bragging about his crimes and leaving crooked clues nobody had been able to decipher. The murders themselves were horrendous. I remember seeing the pictures of decapitated, half-dressed, mutilated women in the newspaper and all over the news. That was before we had cell phones, thank God, otherwise there would have been many more pictures in my memories. The cops were after one clue. The killer always left a sock on the victims. These had different motifs and colors, and were the hideout for the killer to put the letter to the police. The entire town was beyond scared, and my mom wouldn't let me go to the corner alone. I happened to be a woman in my 20s, so I was exactly the kind of girl the killer was after. At first, I had been very obedient to my parents and their orders because I was scared too. About 2 months after the first abduction, I was just too bored and horny to be so compliant anymore. I wasn't even allowed to see my boyfriend. I'm talking about the 80s. You had to respect your dad's word and do as he says. He would often use the line, "As long as you live under my roof, it's my rule book, young lady." But I felt his rules were too strict, and I was too tired of waiting for permission. So I decided to sneak out on a Saturday night and go to my boyfriend's house. We had worked on this secret code in which I would make a noise, he would open the window, and I would go straight into his room through it. The breeze was delicious, and the full moon lit up the entire street. I felt safer when the moonlight bathed my way. I always felt a strong connection with it. It was my ally, my guardian. I put on my running sneakers, just in case. I went out through the window and began walking with a hoodie covering my long blonde hair at a fast pace. Although I thought my parents were exaggerating, looking back, I was scared and excited in equal quantities. That balance, though, was going to be broken very soon. I was going to be scared beyond anything I could ever imagine. As I said before, this was the 80s, so there were no cell phones, and I couldn't call my boyfriend's house to tell him I was going over. My parents would have overheard me. So I took off to his place without saying anything at all. I walked very fast, almost running. And as soon as I made it to his window, I used our code so he'd open it. His head showed up through the glass. He wasn't wearing the usual smile. Instead, he had a somber expression on his face. Also, he was dripping wet. It looked as if he had gone running or something. Still, he opened the window and I climbed into his bedroom. He was standing next to his bed, surrounded by Black Sabbath, Kiss, and Metallica posters. He was playing the Master of Puppets cassette. The first thing I noticed was that he had mud in his shoes. His face was covered in sweat, and he was as pale as a sheet of paper. Besides the sweat, his pupils were massively dilated, as if he'd been doing drugs. We didn't do drugs back then. I mean, at least not together. I noticed his eyes, but didn't say anything because I didn't know much about dilated pupils either. Also, he had a mark that looked like a scratch going across his face. "What's up, baby? Did you go running? What happened to your face?" I asked shyly, hugging him. Yeah, I went running. I ran a lot. A branch, I don't know, I didn't see it, but it scratched my face. As soon as I put my arms around him, I noticed he was soaking wet. "Would you like to have a shower, baby?" I asked, sitting on his bed. He looked at me with an empty look, as if he was gone somewhere else. I had to repeat the question before he said yes and left, wearing only a towel, leaving his clothes on the floor. Once he was gone, I noticed two things that caught my attention. The first was tiny blood droplets on his sweatshirt, on the sleeves. It wasn't old. It was still fresh because I got some on my finger when I touched it. The second thing that caught my attention was that his mud-filled shoes walked all the way to the closet and then back to the window. Out of curiosity, and since he was gone, I opened the closet door, and it creaked open to show me the body of a dead woman, with a knife still stuck to the middle of her chest. Her head was smashed and almost cut off. She was naked, wearing only one sock with little pink shapes. I screamed in horror just as he was opening the door to his room with a towel on his waist. I tried to run downstairs, but he was blocking the door, so I screamed harder for his family to help me. He caught both my wrists with one hand and reached out to take the bloody knife from the dead woman's body with the other. I only had 1 second when he turned his face to grab the knife, and I leaned back and used my own head to hit him on the head with all my strength. He let go of my hands. I lost my balance, and just as I was about to fall from the top of the stairs, his dad caught me. Barely conscious, I looked up and saw him slitting his own throat with the knife after screaming he was sorry. His body fell on the ground, naked, moving spastically until it stopped completely, leaving a pool of red blood on his bedroom carpet that I will never forget. I had been sleeping with a killer for years, and I never realized anything was happening. That night, with the moon shining bright, when I put on my running shoes, the last thing I thought was that I was going to run towards danger instead of away from it. Fake it till you make it. Getting to the office early has some benefits. You get the best coffee, and there's plenty to eat still. Also, everything's quiet, and you can work on your cases for longer without anyone disturbing you. Well, the morning I'm about to talk about was different. Completely different. In a crooked, blood-filled way. Until then, death was just a word in a contract or a number to me. That morning, though, death became a reality. I'm a lawyer, by the way, and a great one, too. Back then, when this horrendous story took place, I was working randomly as an assistant. I was the lowest link in the chain, pouring coffee and shutting my big mouth. The morning of the incident, I got up and threw on one of the 3 suits I had. They were all secondhand, but fit me perfectly. I was faking it until I began making it. You know the story, living in the suburbs, saving on rent, going to company events and asking for the cheapest item on the menu, maxing your credit cards. In sum, I was living the stressful and beautiful life of a young lawyer trying to make it in the Big Apple. I jumped on the subway with my headphones on, minding my own business. It was a calm day. The train was only half full. We were all either sitting or standing, but there was plenty of room to move. I looked up and saw the guy in front of me had an angry look and was looking straight at me. "Freak," I whispered, with an almost closed mouth while my headphones were blasting. When I got to my stop, the train was as crowded as it gets. We were like sardines traveling in a tin. I got out of the formation with a swarm of fellow New Yorkers and walked towards the exit. Suddenly, I felt I was no longer going toward the exit, but was moving in the opposite direction, back to the train. I tried fighting back, but I was pulled by more than one person. By the time most of the people left the platform, I was left with 3 guys. They were all wearing masks. I could tell one of them had blonde hair, but that's all I could see. The one behind me hit me on the back of the head. I turned around to look at him, and another one hit me on the shoulder. And finally, the other one kicked me in the stomach. I was forced to my knees, and one of them said, "You're not so cool without your fat wallet, are you? Come on, hand it over, yuppie." They all laughed at me. I reached out for the wallet and handed it over. They fell into the same trap everyone else did back then. They thought I was some hotshot and not the kid serving the coffee in a fancy disguise. The one in front of me opened the wallet and found a $5 bill. He immediately tossed it out. "You don't even have your credit cards with you? What's the matter with you, yuppie?" I looked at him and said, "I'm broke, man. Leave me alone. I'm on my way to my job. I don't want to lose it, please." They laughed even harder, and the one in the middle came closer. He picked me up from the flaps of my suit and pulled out a big knife. The blade was cold and very thick. I felt it on the skin of my neck. I thought that was it. I was dead meat. "If you don't give me enough dough to make all this worthwhile, I'm gonna have to kill you and make it worthwhile. One less yuppie makes the world a better place." When he finished that line, I couldn't help it. I burst into tears and started begging, pleading, crying for mercy. I told them where I lived and that I was just a scared kid trying to make it in the big town. I was left, bleeding to death on the floor after that big, thick iron blade pierced through my stomach twice. I remember only the floor and hearing their steps as they were laughing, joking, and running away from me. My blood formed a pool around my body. I could savor it, thick and warm. I passed out, miraculously didn't pass away. The wounds from the stabbing took a long time to heal, but eventually mostly did. Now, every morning, when I wake up at 4 a.m. to go to work, I take a moment with both feet on the marble floor, and I thank the paramedics and luck every day. I'm living my second chance. I'm alive because someone else made it to their job on time and helped me. I still honor them and get to the office early. I feel it's what an associate partner like me should do. Nowadays, though, I have a chauffeur drive me.